we organized this a bit in a rush because there's just been tsunami, as I said, of conversations, research, ideas, people doing predictions about what it all means. ChatGPT. Hey, Sam, so good to see you. Sorry, I have so many great people in this room, Zoom room. So we decided we need to figure out what this means and what do we need to be paying attention to in terms of our work around equitable economy, equitable enterprise, and work. I was at a workshop yesterday at Stanford, a webinar, and it was a lot of people talking about transformations in work, and people were talking about gig economy and Amazon work and Bossware and all these things. And it occurred to me, my gosh, we've been talking about this for like 10 years or more, and we're still talking about it, and we haven't solved a lot of these things. And we're about to enter a whole new era. I thought I went to my last Future Work event conference. I'm sure most of you have participated in those. And I envision my forecast, we're going to have a lot more Future Work events and conversations. And as a group that's really been created to think about equitable enterprise and equitable forms of value creation, we just can't bypass this conversation. And so really the purpose of this session is to bring people together and to think about what is it specifically that we need to think about? What do we need to be focusing on so that this generation of technologies is we can move it in a more positive direction, and how do we do that? And that's really the purpose of the whole Equitable Enterprise Initiative. We invited people with different lenses to this conversation, which is very common to IFCF expert workshops and how we do our work. We want people who bring different perspectives. So we have some people who are our advisors, some of them are academics. We have our fellows, and we have writers and science fiction writers and scientists. We have some of our Future for Good fellows, Sam, welcome, and some of our current fellows, Kenny and others. You hopefully will meet all of them at some point. I have some of our funders, supporters are here. Erin from the Kellogg Foundation, and I think Paul Torini will be joining from Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. And thank you so much. We couldn't be doing this work without your support. And I have several of our IFCF colleagues who I want to introduce just three of them, and others you'll meet later probably. Rebecca Shamash is a co-leader of the Equitable Enterprise Project, and my co-conspirator and collaborator. We have Dylan Hendricks, who leads our 10-year forecast and is a creator and a researcher, and he will be co-facilitating with me. We will do it together. And then Sumaya Khan is a research manager for this project, and she's also going to be helping run the session. And then other colleagues I will introduce separately. So in terms of the agenda, you've all seen the agenda. We want to start with just people's experiences, and we'll ask you to share what specific uses you've seen that point to some interesting directions that we should be paying attention to. Then Toshi is going to ground us a little bit briefly, just to talk about what are we talking about here when we talk about ChatGPT and AI. So we're going to have that conversation, and then we're going to really focus on asking you what is it that we want to know more about? What is it that we need? There's going to be a discussion of that. We also want to share, our colleague Lynn Jeffrey is going to share some of ways that we've been doing technology forecasting. We've been around for 55 years, and just a little bit of context for those of you who are not that familiar at the Institute. some of the founders of the Institute were people who were instrumental in developing some of the foundational technologies for what's now known as the internet. Paul Barron was developer of packet switching technology. Jacques Vallée was one of the creators with a team, something called Forum, which is the first real teleconferencing system in 72 to 73. And our colleague, Bob Johansen, who might join us, was actually the first probably social scientist, sociologist, who was doing observational research on how people were using ARPANET, which was the predecessor of the internet. And some of the publications that he and Jacques and Kathy Bean, our colleagues, have put out in those early days are still very, very instrumental and kind of instructional. So we have kind of this long history of thinking about technologies and their social impact. I would say that's at the core of some of the Institute's work, is understanding the interactions of technology and kind of social organizations and their impact. So we have a lot of interest in this particular topic. And then finally, at the end, we want to focus and ask you, given this conversation, what should we be focusing on as part of the equitable enterprise conversations, part of the conversation around how do we take these tools and how do we navigate them, and also how do we shape them? What can we do to make them basically do good things, create more equitable economies, create more equitable enterprises, avoid some of the pitfalls there's so much kind of fear right now. And I think it's well-founded, a lot of it, but how do we navigate this conversation? So, and I imagine that this is kind of the first conversation. I imagine we'll be doing a lot more in this topic and about this topic. So thank you for contributing and participating in this first session. Anything my colleagues want to add? Okay, some of the just rules, I said Chatham House rules, we really want to hear from everybody. So the best kind of these conversations is where people build on each other's ideas. And the other thing is pithiness. So we want to hear from everybody. So occasionally, probably you'll hear me interrupt you, just to make sure that everybody has ability to participate in the conversation.
All right. Should we jump into the sharing, Marina?
Yes.
Great. Well, it's a pleasure to be here with all of you. Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. The first kind of pass through this that we wanted to do was really capturing some of the personal experiences that you might have had. And we're sure there's a wide variety of experience and perspectives in this room on these new kind of generation of generative AI and large language model tools. So as you know, and I'm sure we've all been inundated with third-party signals of things happening in the world. But Samaya here is going to put a prompt into the chat. So we're going to ask folks just in a second here to put a personal experience that you've had with this new generative AI, if you have, in the chat, or if you haven't, that would be useful for us to know as well. And something that kind of sparked surprise for you or raised some questions for you, and what were those questions? Just by way of sharing, I'll share that one experience I've had, and we've been doing a lot of prototyping with the Emerging Media Lab here with Toshi, but I'm also a scout leader in my kids' Cub Scout group up here in Halifax. And it's a volunteer-run program, and we've been using generative AI to kind of flesh out and build out the sort of world building and the immersion of the programs that we're creating. So one we did recently, our Cubs were invited to a large kind of jamboree with other scout groups of a fantasy camp where they had to come up with their own characters, and they were essentially playing Dungeons and Dragons in the woods for a weekend, which was very fun. And we had them develop their own characters, and then we worked with them as they described their characters and their characteristics, to use Midjourney to generate portraits of their characters, and then ChatGPT to flesh out the stories of them, so they could have these really cool kind of Magic the Gathering cards of their own character that they developed. That would have been impossible before, right? We just don't have the resources for it, but it was something we were able to do that was very additive, and as you can imagine, the kids were thrilled about it. So that was a personal experience that felt very kind of empowering and expansive for me, and I know there's a whole gamut of experiences out there. So if you would just take a moment to share in the chat, and then what we'd like to do is, I think we'll scan through there and ask folks to sort of elaborate a little bit on their experiences. So we'll just take a minute here to do that.
Kenny, I'm curious. So you haven't tried it, but what are you thinking about it? What's your like? What's out in the atmosphere? Are you like not thinking about this at all, or are you reading something? Like, I'm just curious.
I think in my world where we're the most sort of um um thoughtful about it is and with the youth organizing community. I think we've been in conversations with lots of youth led community organizing and youth organizing organizations that feel like they're completely turned around and aren't clear like I feel like the context that they find themselves in has them like pretty shut down. And so we've been trying to figure out like how might we as a studio saying we still have the capacity to design the worlds we want, um sort of bring young people into a pretty not grim conversation, but a pretty difficult conversation about what the future of the future, or that what they are feeling melancholy about is a shorter potential trajectory of what they imagine as the good life. And so I'm just trying to wrap my head around what role we could play at the studio to help young people who I think have an unarticulated sense of melancholy and woe for what's possible for their futures, to begin to think that they can
Mhm.
play a role in not just having these technologies make them obsolete, but sort of still like being able to sort of shape and mitigate where they go and still have good lives in the future, where I feel a lot of young people
Yeah.
not necessarily, and youth groups and people who are caring about where young people will be going as adults, feel like they've been handed a bag of
Yeah.
naughty
So a
goods.
lot of kind of apprehension, particularly from young people, which is kind of interesting because we always talk about that young people grow up with this as a given. So, but you're pointing out, yeah. Sam, what about human rights?
Yeah, so the story I shared was just
Oh,
from,
and as you speak, could you introduce yourself?
or of course, sorry, I lead a human rights group called Witness that works on how people use video and technology. We spent about 5 years working on kind of generative AI and its implications in human rights. And so the latest thing we did was a workshop in Nairobi that brought together these journalists and human rights activists from across sub-Saharan Africa. And what we were asking them to do was to engage with tools like Midjourney and understand how the affordances of those supported their work or compromised it, really to think about the ways in which you can easily create photorealistic images, how you can create volume and variation. And we were grappling with a lot of the questions about what that means in their current information environment, where they have often limited amounts of highly credible information they need to share. How do they grapple with the fact that a non-ethical actor can create a lot of these unethical variations of images? You know, we're just pressing the variant button on Midjourney and generating like tons of images of, for example, a forced eviction or an act of police violence. And obviously you could go much more narrative about that. And then the second thing we were doing is saying, like, what are the creative opportunities in this and how do those relate to the way people think about storytelling? I think that probably relates to kind of maybe a more equitable, like sort of the equitable jobs lens, right? Was, you know, what are the implications when we're talking about this sort of ability to create massive volume, lots of variation for like a storytelling practice in this space? And how does it relate to someone like an ethical storyteller, like a human rights advocate, as opposed to, say, a journalist creating weather, or like an ad maker creating lots of generative ads for XYZ? Generally, people were quite negative, but also did see some of these opportunities for, you know, moving into different multimodal forms, right? Like we can now do stuff in photos and video that we might previously have done in text or voice, right? Like, what does that mean for different communities to engage them, right? Which is a different way of thinking about some of this.
Priya, I'm curious. So you're a journalist with KQED, and what you said, like people are quietly using it. Are they hiding it?
I have to say, I'm kind of shocked, right? Chatham House rules apply here because I'm at the PBS affiliate in San Francisco, and we have like next to no tech coverage. So I think for a long time, PBS has sort of felt like, well, we're humanities focused, and there isn't this understanding of like how technology is shaping our lives daily and the exponential growth that we're going to see over the next few years. And so Marina was kind enough to do an interview with us, and we're working to try to bring more of it to the forefront. So two things. One, I don't think as an organization, and I think this is true for many other organizations, notwithstanding the New York Times or, you know, the Washington Post, maybe, many our organization is not ready, is not prepared to do the kind of coverage we really should be doing. And many others are not. They don't even know what's happening yet. And then secondarily, within the organization, some of the journalists are starting to like play around, right? Not even with Midjourney, but at least ChatGPT, they're starting to play with. And I'm hearing from people that they're starting to incorporate it into their scripts, into their workflow, but they're not talking to people about it. They're not talking to editors about it, which becomes problematic for all of the things we're used to doing, right? Fact checking and knowing what is verifiable and accurate. So as news organizations have fewer people working at them, as the technology increases, I think it's just this question of like, where does disinformation grow and go? So I'm new to this world. I'm learning a lot. I'm really thankful to be included, and looking forward to hearing from all of you.
A lot of confusion and lack of knowledge. And Jeff, you brought up Jeff Yang, who is our colleague. You brought out something interesting, which I was thinking about as Dylan was talking about writing stories and creating images and the strike going on. And what Priya just said, journalists using this, I think there's a lot of fear from like the creative community, right? The writers and visual creators. And
yeah, I mean, I think that we've already seen in spaces that are a little more specialized, like copywriting, for instance, AI being used to massively generate things like reviews for Amazon or ad copy for generative advertising in social networks and the like. But the technology has now gotten to a point where there is certainly fear among creators who are developing more sophisticated content, like movie and TV scripts, or who are even, you know, illustrators and graphic artists, seeing this as a real threat to their livelihood, not because it can be a true replacement, but because industries that are looking to cut costs and to sort of lower the bar, if they can actually make up in volume what they actually would be losing in terms of detail and sophistication.
yeah.
That's literally what people are striking about right now on the WGA lines. There's an absolute sense that the bottom rung used to be kind of low-paid talent and individuals who are outside the union. Now the bottom rung is technology.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting, like this kind of almost anticipatory hiring freezes or firings. IBM just announced that they're anticipating jobs being replaced, so they're putting a hiring freeze. So that in itself has impact already.
Just to add to that, I mean, I think that is one of the reasons why foresight is so critical, right? The easy way to look at the impact of AI is to see it as a source of uncertainty, and as a result, to go into stasis mode. But the harder and yet more functional way is to really explore what the impact might look like and identify where the jobs will move and how to leverage AI as a tool and not a replacement for humans.
Yeah.
To that end, I wonder if we might call on Xmina. I was really curious about your example you shared, which seems similar to some work we've been exploring on some of the affordances of kind of exploring a lot more what ifs and kind of, you know, thinking of as like speed running possibility spaces with this tech. Can you speak more about your example?
Yeah, so yeah, I think like kind of building off Jeff's point, you know, about some of the opportunities as well. So I have some work as a career and leadership coach, and I consult with talent development organizations, and I think there's, well, one, I had one very interesting set of conversations with clients who have dropped in their resumes, dropped in JDs, and then asked ChatGPT to help identify the pathway forward for them in their careers. And this is it was fascinating to see, because I was like, okay, yeah, I mostly agree with this, but then it obviously didn't get a lot of the detail. So that's where my coaching still filled in, right? So it augmented the conversation in an important way. And then the other thing I'm starting to talk about with talent development organizations is how this can help kind of structure professional development plans, structure things like just releasing memos around people operations and talent operations, or simply identifying possible announcements of career paths, kind of and even interview questions. And some of these are kind of are at the boundaries of privacy. Like I think there's questions about how much of your resume, your professional path, do you want to upload? And some of these are pretty generic, right? Some clients, all they need is a simple memo that rolls out a PTO policy. And then we did some experiments like make this more trans inclusive, make this more inclusive of working parents, right? Just to see how that plays out. And so there's still more to explore there. But the augmentation aspect of AI, where AI could stand for augmented intelligence, I think in certain cases, with awareness around privacy, ethics, et cetera, I do see potential there. In as long as there's like supported expertise, I think for these highly nuanced cases, things like that.
Yeah.
Thanks for that.
And I know we have
AX, what does AX do?
what? Sorry, Kenny. What?
I missed what AX's expertise is.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I'm a research affiliate with IFTF, and was previously a COO at a nonprofit called MEDAN. And Kenny, we've actually did a panel many years ago at PDF.
Wow.
And, yeah. So AX short for Anshao Mina. But yeah, and now I do career and leadership coaching. So I work with folks in different realms around the career and leadership development.
Thank you.
Yeah, and David, I see and actually we will be talking about that, the kind of building. And I don't know if you want to briefly say what you're concerned about, that there's a lot of kind of ahistorical we haven't gotten to the historical conversation yet. We will, but you want to say?
Well, I put in the chat that one of the things, you'd think as a science fiction author, my aim would be forward, but we've got an awful lot of literature in my field about things like this. Heck, we had gender pronouns, 30 years ago. But the thing about this whole AI thing that really bothers me is that I see almost no one ever mention crises of the past, which followed somewhat similar patterns. Nature is often inflicted upon by invasive species in an ecosystem that's not prepared for it. And obviously, this is a parallel to what we're experiencing now with the release of feral new types of self-replicating organisms. And of course, human history, I have some slides about this, how every time we developed new methods to see better, to know more, and to pay attention differently, this resulted in crises, like the printing press, newspapers, glass lenses, and the 1930s arrival of radio and loudspeakers almost killed all of human civilization. So I think that it's terribly important that we at least occasionally take a look at the context of past crises that we managed to navigate, and take a look at some of the thought patterns and methods that worked, and some that failed.
Yeah. And, as part of our work, we always start with history. What happened before? So before we think about the future, but you think it's a crisis time. We're entering a crisis period. We're in a crisis.
Well, we always are. And always, whenever we get these new methods to see, know, and attend The optimists say this is going to vastly expand what it is to be human. It's going to expand what we're capable of. And always pessimists say humans cannot drink from this fire hose. This has got to be mediated and controlled. Always the pessimists are right first. The first effects of the printing press were 30 years of horrible religious tracts that exacerbated the wars of Europe. But over time, the optimists always proved right. We did get to be larger. We did get thicker skins. We did get methods of separating wheat from chaff. And right now, we just don't have time. We don't have the kind of decades that previous crises had.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you for adding that. Yeah, I was going to say printing press followed by 30-year wars and other not such great things. So good perspective. Okay, we have to move on. And we have people with different, like Kenny hasn't really experienced it or used it, and other people who know, Corey and David and others who have really deep experience with these technologies and historically what they've done. So we asked our colleague Toshi to kind of just put us on the same page in a 10-minute, like, what are we talking about here? And why are we having these conversations? Just so recognizing that people have different levels of knowledge about this. So Toshi leads our emerging media lab. He's been doing conversations about and leading conversations about ChatGPT. So over to you, Toshi.
Thanks, Marina. So yeah, as Marina said, I'm going to share a really brief overview of a very big topic, but we did want to share some thoughts to make sure that at least everybody has had some common language and references to inform the conversation today and help people to orient to some of these new terms like generative AI and large language models. So there's about to be an elephant in pretty much every room in the world, and that elephant is generative AI. And the first thing I want to say about this elephant is that it's so new, so large, so multifaceted that it's nearly impossible to grasp what it is or what it will do to all of our rooms. And we're grasping at various touch points in front of us, and there's a wide range of different perspectives of what this is. Some people even think this elephant is a parrot. And for most people, the primary touch point for generative AI has been ChatGPT. This is a public research demo that launched November last year, and it's marked a major inflection point for AI. Now, of course, IFTF has been helping the world navigate technological inflection points since before the ARPANET became the internet we know today. But this inflection point is different in some very critical ways, and particularly in the rate of adoption. Historically, technologies have taken years or decades to reach mass adoption. And even recent digital platforms like Netflix or Twitter took years before they had 1 million users. ChatGPT here at the bottom took 5 days to reach 1 million users, and it had 100 million users in just 2 months. So after many decades of false starts, AI has finally become of interest and perhaps of use to the world. And remember, this was just a basic demo website that OpenAI launched to see if anybody might find their new large language model useful. And unlike most technologies that you have to choose to start using it, you don't need to adopt generative AI. It's coming to you, and it's about to be in everything, everywhere, all at once. It's coming to your Microsoft applications. It's coming into your Gmail and your Docs and your Sheets. It's coming to your design tools. It's coming to your social media feeds, your financial tools. It's coming to your kids' educational software. And here's just a small cross-section of some of the software companies that are looking to bring it into every other aspect of your digital life. So this is clearly a pretty big deal. What is ChatGPT exactly? So ChatGPT is really just a public demo of a large language model called GPT. So let's talk about some of what GPT is. We could go very deep into this, but just some basic concepts. It's a form of generative AI, Gen AI, that generates new data based on its training data. And GPT is trained on data. It's not programmed with instructions, so it's emergent and not deterministic. And GPT is a form of one of these large language models, or LLMs. And what's powerful about LLMs is that they understand, process, and generate very human-like language. And so that means that LLMs can read and write languages like French and Portuguese, can read and write computer code, and even other expanding data types. And soon, what people are calling multimodal LLMs will also be able to read and write images, audio, and video, and learn and train on those kinds of data as well. And really, these large language models are one of the primary foundational engines or foundational models for the next big tech revolution. Now, GPT is one of many large language models that's being developed both in public and private spheres. And these chatbots are kind of many people's first touch points, like ChatGPT or Bard or Claude. These are conversational interfaces to these underlying large language models. So the question of, is generative AI actually intelligent? We could debate this for days, and people are. And if you look at the charts there, if you look how they're doing on tests, they seem to be doing pretty well in a lot of basic human intelligence tests. But we also know they widely make up facts out of the blue. And some people are really questioning if you can even generate intelligence from statistical math and data. Some people think of these more as stochastic parrots, just as a glorified auto complete. Other folks are questioning whether or not humans are stochastic parrots. But a lot of folks are questioning, so is this AGI, artificial general intelligence or advanced general intelligence? At least for right now, the way I'm thinking of it is that there is some general intelligence capabilities to it. So I'm thinking of it more as mediocre general intelligence. And, with superpowers come super problems. So let's go through a couple of those. In more AI research terms, the superpowers are considered capabilities, whereas the super problems are more alignment issues. You might hear those terms. So let's talk through some of the superpowers. And as our colleague Jeremy often says, it's important to think of these not as super beings or superheroes, but these are super capabilities or superpowers. So we already know that generative AI can generate images and videos. And these LLMs are able to write essays and poems and recipes and HR policies and things. LLMs are also allowing non-coders to write code. But I'm not sure everyone knows that also LLMs are starting to take our fast food orders at McDonald's. LLMs are starting to suggest military orders. LLMs are trying to navigate our legal systems for us. And even LLMs are even writing laws in some countries right now. And LLMs are starting to give medical advice, sometimes more empathetic than human doctors. LLMs are starting to give spiritual advice. And tens of millions of people are already adopting these LLMs as their friend or their coach or even their girlfriend. So LLMs are really powerful conversational computing interfaces that will both allow folks who aren't familiar with computer coding to interface with these powerful systems, and they're going to be able to generate lots of different kinds of human understandable language, not just text, but images and code. And I think it's really important to understand that language is not just words. Language is actually the base operating system of all of humanity. This is how we operate in our personal spheres, in our professional spheres, and our political spheres. So right now, from these chatbots, we're getting mostly answers to our questions and maybe some advice. Very quickly, people are looking to see how we can give these systems agency, the ability to do things and make change in the world, and autonomy, the ability to make decisions on what they're going to do in the world. So very quickly, questions of accountability, human alignment with human values, and even human safety. And this is where we get into some super problems. And this is just a short overview of some of the ones that are being considered. So one that's going to hit really quickly, something that's already happening, is the emergence of AI-generated deepfake images and videos. And even for savvy people, it's beginning to erode people's general ability to trust anything that they see. And a topic I'm sure we're going to get into today is how generative AI is about to augment or displace human workers. And we already know these LLMs hallucinate and make up facts, but it's really important to understand that the reason that they do this is because they are emergent systems, and we don't fully understand how or why they come up with the responses they do. And even the people creating these generative AI systems are not actually exactly sure how they work or what they're going to do. And this unpredictable emergent factors, these are the core concerns of folks like Geoff Hinton that they're having. And even people like Hinton are realizing that they have no idea what this technology that they created is about to do as it leaves research labs and enters new contexts in the real world. And as that's happening, it's really critical to understand the context these generative AI models are being developed in and the incentives of the private companies that are mostly building them and deploying them at this point. Ezra Klein spoke to science fiction author Ted Chiang recently, who observed that most of our fears and anxieties about technology are best understood as fears or anxiety about how capitalism will use technology against us. So obviously there's more to say about generative AI, but that was my quick overview for you today.
All right. I know, Corey, you disagree with everything that's been said. I don't know which part of it. Thank you, Toshi, so much. So, can you say what exactly?
Sure. Well, I disagreed with everything in the preamble in any event.
Okay.
So I think we need to acknowledge that for the commercial backers of this stuff, which is neither artificial nor intelligence, nor does any learning, that their victory condition is for people to believe that this is very powerful and inevitable, and that it will be in all of our applications. These are the same victory conditions that we saw with cryptocurrency. And in fact, the same people are often hyping this. There is a not even very sophisticated marketing trick in which you declare victory at the outset. It is inevitable that everything we do is going to be mediated by cryptocurrency is no more or less true than it is inevitable that everything we do will be mediated by florid habitual liar chatbots, right? That there is no prophet with 2 stone tablets who insists that we do this, right? And CEOs, the fact that CEOs are willing to invest in something, or that they allocate billions of dollars to it, or that they declare that it is in their future plans, does not, on the one hand, mean that they're sincere. And even when they are sincere, it doesn't mean they're right. We have all seen CEOs declare various things, up to and including Web3, to be the future of the internet. And in some cases, they were bullshitting us. In many cases, they were bullshitting themselves. A lot of what we see about AI is basically people who should know better holding flashlights under their chins and telling ghost stories about something that they invented. There's a great chapter in E.L. Doctorow's book, The Creationists. I'm not related to him, where he relates the history of the Genesis myth. And the Hebrews plagiarized it from the Babylonians. And the Babylonians thought that Genesis must be true because they couldn't imagine that they could have invented something that cool. And so they thought it must have been divinely inspired. And there are a lot of ways in which we fool ourselves by insisting that something that we just thought up can't possibly something that we just thought up because we're not creative enough to have just thought it up. It must be true. It must be received wisdom. And I think that these are not falsifiable hypotheses. I want to say that, like, when you see financial analysts claiming that AI is the future, and moreover that it's worth $13 trillion, what they mean is that you can fire $13 trillion worth of workers and replace it with chatbots. That doesn't have to be true for the people involved to get rich, right? It just has to be believed. And one of the things that is very important, especially on the labor side, as we talk about this stuff, is that we don't fall into the trap that Lee Vinsel calls criti-hype, where someone out there claims to be a sorcerer doing evil, and we say we must stop the evil sorcerer, and not, if we pull back the curtain, we'll find a humbug. So this isn't even the first time that these specific people have made this specific claim and turned out to be lying, right? You may remember a few years ago, someone said self-driving cars are inevitable. The first form of self-driving car that we're going to have is going to be the lane following, vehicle following 16-wheeler that will have its own dedicated lane on the interstate highway system. And when you look at the Bureau of Labor statistics, you will find that truck driver is the most common job in America. Therefore, the most common job in America is about to be eliminated by self-driving trucks. And every single element of this was a lie, right? So first of all, even if you could make self-driving trucks that travel on the interstate highway system in their own lane, all you've done is invented a shitty, inefficient train, right?
Right, Corey, but the nature of the trucker's job has been changed. We don't have fully automated trucking, but the point is that it does change the nature of what people.
Yeah, it's been changed by Bossware. It hasn't been changed by autopilot, right? And the BLS statistic turns out to encompass every heavy goods vehicle driver, including like UPS drivers, whom no one is saying will be replaced by machine learning systems anytime soon, not least because those trucks would then have to have a catapult that fired parcels onto your front lawn, right? So it's literally just nonsense. So we see programmers using ChatGPT in interesting ways, right? Like CSS is very hard to debug. Lots of people who are trying to write CSS stuff then turn to a machine learning system and get it to help it debug it. And if we weren't doing Critahype, we would say, oh, look, this is effectively a compiler with more error checking. And no one ever said, oh my God, someone's added more error checking to GCC, programming as an industry is over, right? But because we talk about this as intelligence and as part of the path to an AGI, which is a totally unscoped, non-existent category that no one can ever say we are moving towards, because there is no such thing as engineering that makes progress to unscoped categories, right? That we then say the faster compiler is the death of programmers. The fact that the CEO of IBM believes it, or at least believes that they can cash their bonus from the street,
Hey, Corey, I'm going to have
to. Doesn't mean it's true.
All right, more hype. Got it. Very different perspective. Thank you for bringing.
Let's just say two more very quick things. First of all, lots of rich people think that private equity bosses can beat the market. They are empirically wrong. Trillions of dollars have been pumped into this proposition. It's wrong. And second, I want to say that there's an amazing article I'll paste into the chat from some Stanford researchers who basically looked at the seeds of consciousness Microsoft paper, non-peer-reviewed paper, and basically demonstrated that it's nonsense.
All right, thank you. As we knew this is, there are a lot of very different opinions. Thanks, Corey. This is great. But in the meantime, people are using these things, and it would be great to hear from people like in education, teachers. What are you seeing your students doing, and professors? Molly, are you there? Do you want to share some things? Like, do you see some interesting? What are you observing? And if you're not,
I'm here. Hi.
Can you introduce yourself? You're a professor.
Hi there. I'm Molly Steenson, and I am Vice Provost for Faculty at Carnegie Mellon University. I am ethics and computational technologies, and a professor in the School of Design, and soon to have a pretty monumental career shift I'll tell you about in a second. The areas that I am most interested in seeing this take place is kind of, I guess, on one hand, in the long history of generative AI. We have been talking about this since the 1950s in some way or another, and we always see mechanisms of computation used for risk and calculation. So, look at the history of mainframe computing, for instance. And then the history of representation and computation, and AI being used for those perspectives and purposes. And then finally, generative perspectives. And I've always wondered at first whether that was, linear, but now I think it's cyclical. So we go back and forth with our expectations of computation. I'm using the word computation carefully and intentionally, and not saying GPT right here, a large language model, but I think now we do see a bit of a hockey stick going up where things are being realized. In the field of architecture, which is where my PhD is, I see the question of representation with tools like DALL-E and and Midjourney and the big questions that that bears out, but it doesn't change how architects practice. It changes, and it doesn't necessarily change the buildings that get built. So I think it raises questions there. Looking forward to attending some critiques this week in the School of Architecture that are going to take that on critically. And I would say that if you do not know Kyle Steinfeld at Berkeley, he'd be a really good person to include in future conversations here. But I try to see all of this in a much longer time frame. For me, I happen to set that time frame as about 65 years, but we could also look at that time frame going back to things like Dadaism or absurdism in terms of the kinds of questions that we can ask in the arts when we open up the way that we do it. And so I think I'm most interested in the ways that we can use these tools to understand the seams that exist in the world. I've always been a fan of Gilles Retsin, who is a Belgian architect practicing in the UK who does work in computation, but builds in timber, and using tools to see what he understands a tool like Midjourney understands of timber. Or of course, Janelle and her wonderful and very humorous work to point out what the edges of things are. And I'll say that pretty soon I'm going to be the president and CEO of the American Swedish Institute, where this is not so much my focus anymore. So it's a bit of a change.
Oh, interesting. Jerry, you want to say you're also a professor teaching at the University of Michigan? What are you seeing?
Yeah, I have no career changes to announce, so all is stability here. So the immediate thing was everyone asked, how are our students going to use this to cheat, which is usually a pretty good bet because it is a lot quicker and cheaper than the essay mills that advertise online, and can be thoughtfully put together if you ask the right set of prompts. It's really good at that kind of work. And students don't like to find themselves at 3 a.m. the night before an assignment's due and they haven't started yet, but they do a lot. And so I already had colleagues last December saying about 10% of the answers turned in were clearly written by AI. It spoke languages that they didn't. So the students are already all over this on a daily basis, trying out in various ways to come up with new business models. I spoke yesterday to a task force at my university about what are we going to do in response to all of this in time for the fall. And some fairly smart people were saying this is going to completely transform what higher education looks like, starting very soon. So the guy that started our bioinformatics department said the first year curriculum for our doctoral students is now obsolete. And he's not an alarmist. He's a pretty smart person who started the department. And he says, this is going to be sort of a pretty big deal. Our biggest recruiters at my school for the MBAs are consulting. And I'd have to say ChatGPT looks like consulting as a service. It says stuff very confidently and very fluently, even if much or most of it is made up. So it's pretty hard. If you look at the tasks that consulting does, an awful lot of that can be done by AI. Accenture employs 721,000 persons around the world, which is 100 times as much as Zoom. An awful lot of those jobs seem to me might not be coming back. So one of the things that one is seeing in a couple of worlds, the tech jobs are going away really quickly. The consulting jobs, the firms that made offers are saying, but we don't want you to start till January. And so I think we're seeing very early but informative signs that this is going to have a pretty big labor market effect. Paper came out 2 days ago that tried to calculate the market impact of a firm's exposure to GAI. So it used Revelio data to try to estimate the distribution of occupations within companies, and then calculated the stock market impacts of exposure to GAI, and they found it to be pretty significant. And their prediction was the companies that are most in a position to lay lots of people off are the ones that are getting the biggest boost right now, which is horrifying, but not unpredictable under the American flavor of shareholder capitalism.
So the markets are already taking this into account. Yeah.
Yeah, they assume that companies are going to be doing layoffs in bulk. If any job that can be replaced by GAI will, and so they're sort of licking their chops for that.
Yeah. How about you, Xiaowei? You're a writer, you're also a professor. What are you seeing?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of interesting layers going on, right? I think a lot about labor and especially tech worker organizing and worker organizing. And so it is, like I said in chat to Corey's point, like all these concepts are helpful, but then what are the strategies that workers can use to, actually enforce kinds of changes or like union contracts and kind of thinking about the day-to-day in this. There's also the flip side of it where, in Oakland, I'm in touch with like some local organizing groups, and there's this one organization in East Oakland that they do a lot of amazing community support work, and they've actually been really interested in using ChatGPT because as like a volunteer-run community org, they don't have the time or the resources to hire like a copywriter or someone who's like doing grant application work. And so I think this is the question, right, of like less about like autonomy with a capital A and how can like regulation actually support community autonomy in the use of these tools, right? Whether that's unions or also local orgs. The other thing that I would say is, students using ChatGPT has been pretty horrendous. It's like, as other professors have mentioned, it's very clear. But I'm really kind of worried about the long-term effects because it's just like, even if you say like your paper is clearly written by ChatGPT, please rewrite it. I think it still, like, the logic hasn't been embedded, right? Like that this is a tool that we can use both at school, but also at work.
Mm-hmm. Great. And Katja, over to you. You're looking at labor issues specific to AI, right? In Partnership for AI. So what are you focusing on? What's on your radar right now?
Yeah, Marina, thank you for having me. Hi, everyone. Sorry I was late coming from an event we were holding exactly on this topic with the steering committee. So at the Partnership on AI, I run an initiative that's called AI and Shared Prosperity Initiative that tries to think about what are the design choices and deployment choices that we can introduce to get ahead of some of the labor risks and hopefully harness some of the opportunities that would close the gap that exists in when we think about AI risk identification and impact assessment. There is very frequently a big gap around labor. You will have a checklist that has like 30 questions around transparency and bias and like one on labor or nothing. And usually the way it's kind of responded to is the policy solutions that are being discussed. They are sort of like at the labor supply side intervention. So talking about labor retraining or upskilling or UBI in some circles, right? And so that kind of puts the onus away from technology companies and deployers, saying that it's almost like technological march is inevitable. So we focus less on predicting which jobs are going to be affected and asking, well, how do we think about the future kind of as a something that the society creates? And what are the choices we need to make if we are trying to make technology more worker-friendly by design? So the steering committee that we're working with, we're about to publish the guidelines on exactly that. We're hoping that they're going to be mostly taken up by unions and labor organizations as they're trying to think about what are the risks they should be paying attention to and negotiate around, but also hopefully they're useful in like policy context and be taken up by AI companies as part of their responsible AI processes. For those of you who are interested in like following this work, They're going to be released in just a few weeks. You can leave your email to us on this website to get them in your inbox, or just reach out to me. Would be very interested in connecting with this group. And yeah, thank you for letting me join this conversation. It's really timely.
Yeah. And do you think, like, the labor side, do you feel like there's a lot of understanding of this, or a lot of concern?
We are definitely seeing growing attention to this, and some of the labor partners we're talking to definitely are very on top of this. And, you know, starting from, you know, people in the creative professions who you would expect, you know, to be paying a lot of attention, but also like going all the way to informal workers. We're working with an organization in India that unites like 2 million of self-employed women, SEWA, and they're very much tracking these issues. But a lot more awareness is needed. And this is, I guess, like, this is where definitely see and appreciate Corey's points. And, you know, guess what we want to ask for is that people do take it seriously while kind of like not giving into the hype, but we also don't want, you know, them to kind of be missing, you know, not be paying attention.
Yeah, I think there is a kind of an interesting dichotomy between, there's a hype, right? And hype creates its own impacts on financial markets and where the money goes and investments, and that's hype, and hope, you know, that disappears, the bubble eventually bursts. But at the same time, there is some real things that this technology enables, or this tool it will enable, and it's sort of, that's what we need to be parsing out, what's for real and what's the hype part of
Exactly.
it. But the hype itself is important too.
Is important, yeah, and we are definitely seeing more. It's not new that the threat of automation is used straight up for union busting and undermining collective bargaining efforts. But it seems like there is more of this now. And who knows, like, how much of that is like really rooted in like feasibility of that automation, as opposed to signaling both to the Wall Street, which, you know, is still very much like praised. You know, this is a signal that gets rewarded, but also a negative signal to the unions and the workers around their organizing efforts.
And even the conversations that are in all the media about how so much is replaceable, that also takes power away from workers already, just in those conversations. Howard.
Definitely.
Yeah. So I think, first of all,
introduce yourself, Howard.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. You know, from a functional standpoint, I think everybody's still trying to figure it out and have, you know, tinkering with this and tinkering with that. But I do believe that this could be the great equalizer, actually, for people in the lower income world. And let me explain. The gig workers that's now, you know, becoming a higher and higher percentage, home care workers, if you could give them more ability and knowledge base, what you could do with this, you could increase their efficiency, their income, their impact. Gig workers, how to maximize their efficiency, the relationship, their communication. I think, you know, so much focus is on what it might do to the existing employee structure. But I think the great potential here for people in a positive way is the gig worker and the home care worker, which is really a gig worker. You know, they're all, you know, there's 4.5 million. But in so many different ways, I think if we think creatively of how it's going to make that group of people have more talent and more marketable and have more productive, that you could change the dynamics greatly. I mean, so they can't do it themselves. And that's where a cooperative or some type of an affiliation has to be. They won't figure it out themselves, but there's a case where you don't need a lot of people to figure out something for them to be part of something, and where they become just so much more efficient economically from a functional standpoint. So I think there's a huge ability to make this the great equalizer.
All right, there's one positive. vision of this. If they organize, and probably if we had a slightly different social safety net, that would help. But yes. Okay, Jeremy, and do raise your hand. I see people starting to raise hands. Jeremy.
Building a bit on that.
A little intro.
Oh yeah. Hi, I'm Jeremy. I'm a poltergeist who's been haunting the Zooms of IFTF for the last half decade.
Jeremy used to be at IFTF, and he was peripatetic then, and he still is.
Yeah. Started working with GPT-2 with a lot of my IFTF colleagues, writing short science fiction stories about the future of China, Nigeria, back in 2019. I'm a writer and a poet, and so that got me really into generative AI and got me deeper in the tech world. Now I consult with companies on how to apply generative AI, build generative AI systems. We just launched a platform called Library of Babel that's kind of like a cross-model playground attached to a feed, so people can collaborate on prompts and experiment with stuff outside of ChatGPT as well. In terms of like, yeah, won't give my full TED talk right now, but just building off of what Howard said, one, I don't know about the long term, whether it will be a level playing field thing or be bad for people. What I can say is I work a lot in Nigeria, and the young people there are very aggressively adopting ChatGPT. And there's no hype cycle around ChatGPT in Nigeria yet. There's no media frenzy. The companies are, even GPT-3 was not even officially like available in Nigeria, and the paid version is still very hard to access in Nigeria. But people are adopting it for their copywriting work and everything, just kind of like pretty matter of factly. I also, just in terms of like the feasibility that Katya was referencing, I would be careful to not over map past like tech hype cycles to what's going on right now. Not because we might not get there, but as someone who in the past was like, I've been looking at blockchain since 2011. I really love building VR experiences for people for fun, love, and profit. Like, I love those technologies, and I've never ever told someone you need to get in this now. Like, it's a revolution, it's going to absorb everything. Like, they're still very early stage, even after billions of dollars from Meta, VR, and Metaverse are all like kind of not there yet. You see these big valuations from companies that are going into, even in a bad funding environment, that are going to startups that are AI focused. Most of that money is being spent on compute, and that's because we actually do know that enough data and compute do make the model capabilities better, and we haven't found the ceiling on that. And that means that there might be a ceiling on that. There like might be a multiple billions of dollars where like you don't get a more capable model, but we don't know where that is yet. And so a lot of these, doesn't mean these companies are going to succeed economically, and everyone's points about that it isn't inevitable that this will, how we use this in society, or that we should use it in society. And I wouldn't want to say that, but this isn't kind of like the crypto stuff where it's like these big inflated valuations, and then it's like, what is it? Where does it go? What does it do? These are directly being paid into compute that then is going to result in very capable models that do really interesting things and have a big impact. And we can see from a technical perspective that, I don't want to say that it's like certain, but it's like very, very, very likely. And it won't just be replicators. One other thing, which is kind of different from that, is, so just wouldn't overmap to hype cycles. I think a lot of this is actually not hype, and I feel a lot more scared about that. I think there is a countervailing force here, which is open source. The open source community has been really incredible. OpenAI specifically did do Willy Wonka and like close the chocolate factory, and the candy still comes out, but we don't know what's inside anymore, which is sad. But Stability AI and other organizations have risen in their place and are releasing highly capable models that are not on the image side are state of the art, on the language side are approaching state of the art, that are available to everyone for any use, with, if they can run it on their infrastructure. So that's why we need cooperative computing, and why we need cooperative like infrastructure.
I'm glad you're bringing up this really important point as we're talking about equitable enterprise. The ownership and the governance of the basic infrastructure,
yes,
is really important. Yeah,
totally. And and that there's, I think, some, like the internet, there are these like oppressive, highly centralized value sucking systems, but that there are this countervailing force of like distribution and open source. And that has continued to like be a force in AI. The computational propaganda here might say that like that's going to lead to our downfall, because then if everyone has it, like that's bad. But if your fear is that only a few people control this, like so far that isn't necessarily true, with a lot of caveats.
All right. More to say. Thank you. Jessica Gordon-Nembhard is a professor at the John Jay School and a writer.
Hi. Yeah, I've got to get off soon, so I just thought I would say a few things quickly. I love the way the conversation is going. I guess things that I'm interested in academic student learning and in labor issues and labor control issues. On the academic learning side, and I think this might apply everywhere, we have been talking about, one, how to recognize the generated work, but also how to either steer students away from it or keep students thinking on their own and not depending on these things in addition to, right? We're just generally worried about plagiarism. What I've been trying to do, like with my assignments and stuff, is to make them so unique that the students still have to think on their own. So, critical thinking, having them connect things we talked about in class and the unique readings that I've given to the assignment, right? So if they don't quote the readings I gave them, then they lose points, right? If they don't interrogate the reading, if they don't use some of the tools I gave for how to critically think about this stuff, then they lose points. It's hard and it's a lot more work for me, but I actually think it might be a good strategy in general. I'm also starting to go back more toward oral exams, which I used to hate because so many of my students are very reticent talkers, and
I grew up on oral exams. I don't know, Katya, if you the same. I never took a multiple choice exam until I came to the US at the age of 18 and was baffled.
But I'm more and more having students have to talk about, right? I make them talk about their research paper even before they hand it in, so that I know that they've been working on it and have some ideas of their own, right? But it's hard, but that's kind of, so, more oral, more innovative, looking for innovative analysis, teaching more critical thinking, making sure they're using more, not so much run-of-the-mill stuff that would just be the first two things that come up when you Google something, right? So giving them more unique readings, that kind of thing. And then I just want to say on the labor side, I don't have a lot, haven't done this a lot, but I was just on a panel, I guess, last week about cooperatives, and co-op platforms in this digital world, and how we can figure out more democratic governance and decision-making about what gets used, how it gets used, and even what's created, and then who controls the software and the platforms and the creations and all that. And so I do think, again, I like the discussion about, how this is all capitalism and we have to be wary of that. We need to figure out, are there ways that, collective ownership, solidarity, economics can fit or can take over these things? Or are we saying that it's inevitable, that it's just going to promote capitalism more, and we've got to figure out some other strategy to assert the kind of humane ways that we want to live as human beings? So I think there's still a lot of questions out there, but I think if we put our heads together, we can start to think about different ways to address them.
Yeah, I think you bring up something really interesting, which is that this technology also has the potential of actually making us more human, like giving exams, oral exams, and giving assignments that are more unique, that cannot be automated. And the fact that, the software is responding better on tests of doctors, or they're more empathetic, tells us something about our doctors or management consultants, if they're so easily, that to me is, there is a potential there for something good. Okay, Christopher. who is our mayor in residence and in politics and policy arena. What are you thinking?
Well, so I maybe to pick up on a bit of what Jessica said, and also what Howard was saying, because I think Howard's right in a sense, but also the directionality not sure I share, which is the idea that if we use AI to give folks with less education more opportunities, more power. Because I think part of what's at play here is that AI is particularly anxiety inducing for those of us who benefited from a highly unequal education system, and this notion that more and more education at more and more elite universities is critical, which we've all invested in very heavily. And so, something that diminishes the relative value of clear writing and computational skills, or being able to do a literature review, right? These are threatening to our sense of self and privilege. And I'm not convinced necessarily that those are bad things, that they're not in the Bible as the most important human values necessarily. Of course, I've been guest teaching. We're trying to help the students figure out how to use GPT to think critically. So you can turn in your essay that was done jointly with you and ChatGPT, but you also have to turn in the whole conversation. So how are you interrogating ChatGPT? What questions are you asking to get it to refine? How are you participating in that? And I think at least our preliminary impression that particularly for students who in our community college that didn't graduate from high school, or whose first language isn't English, that it is quite empowering in terms of their ability to think critically in a different way. So this is one small example in one class, but to me, I think it does challenge us in ways that are uncomfortable for those of us that should be uncomfortable, and open up some paths other ways. The other piece that you mentioned, Marina, my life's in politics. I'm actually in the middle of a political campaign right now. And so I've been, and I had to fill out a bunch of questionnaires for different PACs and interest groups from my campaign, wanting to know, Marina knows this example, wanting to know, where do you believe that the foot ends? Because there's a battle between general practice doctors and podiatrists. Does the foot end the ankle, above the ankle, at the ankle, or below the ankle? And how would you define it? I don't know. I'm not a doctor. So I put the whole questionnaire into ChatGPT and said, here's my background, here's my values, here's what I believe in, here's what I've worked on, give me a first draft. Which it did. Super helpful. I had to completely rewrite it, but it was a very, very good way to deal with writer's block and be more responsive and meaningful to them. But they actually don't even need a questionnaire anymore, because they can use the same systems to figure me out without asking me a set of predetermined questions and multiple choice answers. So this arms race in the democratic sphere around that aspect of politics, I think, is an interesting development. But then also ultimately for democracy itself, because our current system is not about it's so difficult to make sense of public values and opinions. It's so difficult to do so that we don't even really try. We pick one day every 2 or 4 years in the afternoon, where a small subset of people on that one day tell us what they think, mediated by a set of candidates or ballot propositions that have nothing to do with what they actually care about and that they don't know about. So it's highly, 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 highly ineffective at capturing the broad sense of the public's values, aspirations, fears, desires, and priorities. But there are a lot of other signals that are out there that we're just incapable in cities and counties and states and national governments to be able to assimilate and make sense of. And so I know there have been cities, we've been one of them, Tel Aviv and others, that have been trying to use some of these tools to to sense better, to understand better what people are really thinking and organizing around and activating about. Completely worthless so far, but I do think the applications for good and evil on the democracy are also quite profound.
That's great. All right. I know not everybody has spoken yet, and we'll make sure that people who have not will call on you in another part. But I want to turn it over now to my colleague Lynn Jeffrey. And Lynn has been at the Institute almost the same amount of time as I have, which is almost 2 decades or over. And she, at one point, she's a cultural anthropologist, was leading our technology program. And she also leads our Foresight trainings and education and in future thinking. So ask Lynn to just share very briefly some of the things we've learned and some of the techniques and tools we use for thinking about the impact of new technologies. Lynn.
Great. Thank you, Marina. And I'm not gonna take longer than 10 minutes here. I'm going to ask Marina and Dylan to help me, but I just put together a few slides, trying to summarize in 10 minutes some of the big lessons and kind of approaches that we take at IFTF when we're trying to think about 10-year forecasts of any kind of technology, which is really what we have been doing since our founding in 1968. So kind of, you know, let's take just a little run through it, and I'm sure some of this will seem very familiar to you, but it's an overview. The first thing is, this is what is known in the futures world as Amara's Law, from one of the former presidents of the Institute for the Future, Roy Amara. We tend to overestimate the effect of a technology in the short run and underestimate the effect in the long run. And I think this is right now, I think we are overestimating the effect of the technology, and we're, that's some of the conversation that we've been having is how big is this? What's the scale of this? What's the impact? And I think that's the observation is that that's part of the emergence and the evolution of new capabilities. But we do also underestimate the effect in the long run in general. And so that's really why the Institute exists, is to think about longer term impacts and trying to get around the initial hype, but to think about the profound impacts. Marina, anything more you would want to add to this before I move on to the next point?
Just a lot of humility in terms of just forecasting, because if you do take the long view, it's very difficult. That's why we do all kinds of scenarios and imagination. And I think science fiction is a good tool for it too, to think about longer term.
The second point is, and this is kind of a hybrid of a quote that comes from many different places. It takes, some people say 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, decades to become an overnight success. And this is just the acknowledgement that any new thing that kind of feels new and bursts onto the world as an overnight success is not new. And so I feel like, it's important to kind of get past, acknowledge, but move past fairly quickly the discussion of how new is it, and is it really new? And I mean, nothing is new. Everything is layered in the past. All of the ways that we do things will continue to exist for the most part in the immediate future. Dylan, anything more you would want to say about this point?
Yeah, I think it's another great tool we use to ground ourselves, to help with, the Roy Amara's Law helps to sort of discount the hype from the actual capability. And this one allows us to have a shared grounding of assumptions of, like, how did we actually get to the present, to understand what might be possible to do in the future. So yeah, very foundational, I think, for our work.
And just to add, I actually, I don't know how many of you read Jaron Lanier's article in the New Yorker. I've sent it to everybody on our staff, and he kind of talks about it. It's like, this is an evolution of basically collaboration technologies that's been built on top of a lot of technologies that were preceding it. It seems like it's something overnight, but we've been building into this for decades.
Yeah, and I'm reflecting on the conversation that we had in the chat partly, which is, are we talking about machine learning? Are we talking about automation? Is it computation, big data? There's so many different, the language and the labels that we apply to different sets of technologies at different moments actually shapes the way that we experience them, how they are marketed, all of that. So playing with those categories, and even sometimes coming up with your own categories, is always a great way to do this kind of longer term work. Another quote, which is a hybrid attributed to several different people, including Winston Churchill and Marshall McLuhan, is, we shape our tools and then our tools shape us. And at the Institute, we are always trying to understand both the legacy and the history that's led us up to the moment of the tools that we're shaping, but then also how those tools will reshape our society, our power dynamics, our relationships with one another. And it's sort of a basic way of thinking that lies at the heart of, I think, all of the work that the Institute does. Marina, Dylan, anything you want to add there?
This is what kind of gives me hope. It just means that we're not passive bystanders to this. We have agency.
The other thing I like about this is I really like thinking about this generative AI moment. It's, on the one hand, of course, it's a technology and it's a tool, but it's also really, I think, a medium and an evolution of mediums that we've had. It's conversational. It can be used in different ways to facilitate different kinds of processes. So I think like taking a literacy approach to understanding it has been really helpful for me.
Great. One more quote, and then I have just kind of a building blocks of how we approach technology forecasting to wrap us up. Dylan, I think this is a quote that you, and I know Jeremy and Tosh and some others have been really finding helpful. Can you talk about this a little bit?
Yeah, this has been going around a lot. I think I might have seen it most recently, maybe like, I think Corey, you had a piece that used this quote at the top. This is a great quote, I think, for approaching anything new with humility. So this recognition that, our confidence in what we think we understand is always just based on limited mental models, and all those models are necessarily wrong. They're limited and will be, but some are useful and predictive in some applications. So that's why we want to have meetings like this, is to gather a diverse set of different mental models and perspectives to be able to kind of feel out the elephant that Toshi was describing in his presentation, but again, with that sense of humility at the base of it.
Jeremy, did you want to jump in on this one with a comment?
Yeah, quick add on the nuances here of generative models. Generative models are different in that they are more useful when they are wrong, which is different from other statistical models. With most statistical models, you want your model or your representation to accurately, as closely as possible, represent the underlying data. With language models, we actually deliberately make them less representative of the underlying data with things like fine-tuning or RLHF in order to make them more like what we want them to have said. So like original GPT-3 is more accurate, is less wrong than ChatGPT, but it is less useful. It is harder to use. And it might be things like more racist or more sexist. So even though the underlying distribution is represented by that, and the fine-tuned version is more wrong versus the original distribution, uniquely with this statistical model, slightly more wrong in a particular way makes it more useful, which kind of breaks this at the edges.
Okay, interesting. Thank you. And last slide, what we think of, we're actually in the process of trying to develop a course in technology forecasting, the way the Institute does it. A lot of people do technology forecasting. But the building blocks that we use from a high level begin with understanding the technology stack, which is not simple, as we've discussed. Usually involves a lot of conversations, a lot of research, a lot of group conversations with people from different points of view, with different ways of, developers, people who are developing, critics, activists. So that is not, it's a large undertaking to begin with. And it's usually not a single point of view on what the technology stack is. But we get as close to it as we can. We try to understand it as well as we can with our network of experts. And then we really start asking, what are the new capabilities that will be enabled by these technologies? And really try to just lay that out in a big picture about the new affordances, the new capabilities. Then we ask, what will you do with them? How might they be put to use and by whom? So we'll probably consider lots of different stakeholders, different kinds of communities, and how they might use these new capabilities. And one of the ways that we get a window into that is by looking at new behaviors that we see today that help point towards different uses. Often this is just ethnographic and close participant observation and understanding how people are using things and what that can tell us. And then we also always have to ask, once we kind of start imagining what these new capabilities are and what the new practices are, how are those going to intersect over the next decade with other really important forces of change, like climate change or financialization or an aging population or any number of things which are relevant. And that is, we have all kinds of tools and processes for doing that. And finally, of course, we would ask who might benefit in these futures with these new practices, who might not. And to your question, AX, that you highlighted earlier, how might this accelerate or disrupt current power dynamics? I'm going to stop there and turn it over to Dylan for a comment and Marina, and then I'm going to turn it back to you, Marina, to facilitate the rest of the session.
Yeah, thanks, Lynn. I'll just speak briefly because I know we have a lot of other perspectives we want to get to, but this is obviously, like for many folks, like we're very interested in this. We have been exploring this for years, both in terms of sort of AI forecasts that IFTF has done for decades, but also just in terms of large language models, and the exploring them from a design research perspective has been my and Toshi's kind of personal sort of goal is to gain literacies on what are the limitations and the capabilities of it. And so yeah, we would love to continue this work and this research with everybody, particularly pursuing like how do we shape this towards more equitable kinds of platforms and outcomes for folks.
All right. What we want to do now is I want to bring the conversation back to what does it all mean for equitable economy and equitable enterprise, and ask you to, we're going to randomly assign you to small groups and basically pose this question of what do you think as the purpose of this research and the initiative, Equitable Enterprise Initiative, is to really look at what are the ways that we can improve in terms of economic outcomes, in terms of wealth inequality, in terms of creating structures, business structures, enterprise structures that are more equitable, meaning that they deliver returns and distribute more equitably assets and returns to those who contribute to them. We've been looking at co-ops, community trust, public banks, all kinds of other community resources, all kinds of other forms. So given that, what are the issues do you think we need to be focusing as part of Equitable Enterprise, either in research or in our convenings? We've been doing deep dives, we've been doing interviews, podcasts, all kinds of other things. So that's the question. Oh, that definitely wasn't enough time.
A little taste.
This is like a little taste. It's like we nibbled on something, and I was thinking, okay, I want to follow up with both Jeremy and David Brin and have a much longer conversation. And hopefully we'll have that chance and we'll continue this. But kind of two my takeaways from this conversation is that philanthropies and possibly governments need to invest in sort of foundational infrastructure for this. And then David brought up a really important issue, which is what is Wall Street itself, the financial institutions, what are they coding for in these tools? And I want to dive a lot deeper into that conversation. Any other brief? I want to also give room for a few people who have not spoken yet, to give them room also. Anybody else? I don't see any. Oh, Jerry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was with Katja and Howard, and our thought was we need an instant think tank to design equitable enterprises for parts of the labor market that are often ignored, sort of not the consultants or coders that are going to be immediately laid off, but can we create co-ops that build on this technology to enable parts of the labor market like home care workers that might otherwise be disempowered? So basically, Equitable Enterprise Institute convene insta think tanks for designing new kinds of enterprises.
Yes, think tanks are us. Great idea. Let's see, Doug, you haven't said anything, but I actually I read your Medium piece. Any concluding thoughts on this?
Well, that most recent
Kevin. And
Yeah.
Rebecca, I haven't. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about a bunch of things. I mean, I got stuck on the idea of AIs reducing probabilities, because they're picking the most probable outcomes. So it's this sort of rear view mirror management, and that we end up kind of trapping ourselves in the current moment, that we don't get a future anymore. We get the present magnified if we start following those things. But the piece I just wrote was sort of, I used both the Doors and Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young to say, teach your children, because otherwise you get, the nightmare of the end. Father, I want to kill you. My understanding, it's sort of it's tied to the other idea, is that if these things are modeling human behavior, then our only choice is to act like we want them to be. They're watching. It's like your kid's in the backseat of the car watching when you curse out the other driver. It doesn't matter what you tell them. It matters what you do. So if we have these things that are going to model and amplify our behavior, the surest path to a happy society is to start acting the way we want them to serve as a good role model, good learning models.
So become better humans.
Yeah, or else.
Right. All right, Rebecca, anything you want?
Yeah, one thing that I've been curious about is if this if we want to call it a revolution, some don't, it really does result in huge productivity gains, then we have an opportunity to maybe do something more interesting with those productivity gains, or distribute them kind of to workers and push them towards leisure time versus turning them into corporate profits. I was in a group with Douglas and Toshi and Molly, and Molly had interesting comments. I think she kind of doesn't believe that those gains will be real. So whether or not there's even something new there to realize, I think is also questionable. I don't know if she wants to hop in or not.
Which is true in terms of data. There's been very little gains in productivity with all the previous hype about automation.
Well, again, I keep looking back in time, and I look at the moment in the 1960s when we were talking about great gains in computation and in leisure, in human leisure, and the changes that we were going to make as a society. I look at this through a British lens and some of the work that was going on at that point in architecture and technology, and it didn't actually happen. I also think of, there's something here to look at household labor, the history of household labor, and the ways that certainly hasn't freed women in particular and people who would otherwise be underrepresented from gains in the workforce. So I'd like to be hopeful about that, but I don't think history bears that out.
Yeah. Thank you. Kevin, are you somewhere where you can, or do you want to chime in?
I don't feel I have much to add at this point, so thank you.
All right. Okay. Well, thank you. Oh, Jeremy.
I think this will be an optimistic note to end on, and I wanted to mention it in our group too, didn't get a chance, which is that I think a great leverage point for equity right now is that nobody, including the people that are making the models, actually understand how they work well. Like that, this doesn't mean that they're unknowable. They're just very complex mechanisms. And similar to like when we invented human flight, we were able to do it before we understood the mechanics behind it. Because of that, everyone's kind of on a level playing field. And so like with the people that Kenneth is working with, I think I caught that it's like younger folks and things like that. Like we authentically can tell them, if you get started now, like you can figure this out. You can be the one that figures this out. You don't have to be in one of the big companies, like with time and intention and knowledge, which I know is hard to get. Like any one of us here could be the ones that figure out that and like make those advances. So I think that's kind of exciting and is a possible danger for controllability, but also is an opportunity for equity because like it's available to anyone. And that's my kind of optimistic take on that.
All right. I wonder, Priya, are you somewhere where you can talk? You're on mute right now. I'm just curious as a journalist, what did you hear? I know it was a kind of a divergent conversation because this is like a bit of pulse taking. People like, where you stand on this? What do you think about it? This is a lot of hype. This is exciting. Not, I don't know, Priya, if you're there, it would be interesting to hear from the journalist point of view. Oh, she's okay. She's probably
she's saying, yeah,
she's somewhere where she can't do it. But Lynn and my colleagues and Dylan, what are you hearing in terms of kind of our work and this conversation, Lynn?
I mean, I feel like we've been in the thick of this for months now. And so it's just interesting to continue to hear. It's just a lot more questions, honestly. But I think it's helpful, really helpful for the purposes of narrowing the research agenda and the, how we can, what angle we want to take on this for the Equitable Enterprise Initiative. So I heard so many different interesting things. It's hard for me to pick just one, but I just want to thank everyone for their contributions. Dylan or Toshi?
Yeah, very similar. I mean, I do think what this is validating some assumptions I had, that I think where we could offer value maybe would be to help sort of have conversations like this, collect and synthesize and identify and kind of amplify levers for equitability with this, because as Jeremy and others have said, like, it is so early. It is in its most shapeable form now. Like, we are not dominated by this by any particular kind of hegemony yet, and it can seem like that we will be, but there is hope in that these large language models can be kind of produced by anybody with like the money and the data, like, because the process to produce them has been published before the companies realized this was going to be a perceived golden goose for them. So there's a lot of hope for things like open source models, cooperative models, like, and maybe developing scenarios that are empowering and shape this future in more empowering ways. Is it seems like it's needed, and people aren't seeing those resources out there. So I see a role for us there, maybe.
Yeah, and actually, if I can just jump in with one larger thought, which is we still haven't done any 10-year forecasts on this. I mean, we're really so stuck in the present and what's happening. I think we badly need some organized conversations and thinking that do push us out beyond the immediate and do explore what are the long-term implications. What does the world look like in 2033 or beyond? What happens, and start doing some real, thinking about that, and as a group, as a collective, and sharing those.
Yeah, I had kind of the same thought, that I want to go back and reread some of our forecasts from way back, including some of that early Jacques Vallée and Bob Johansen work, some other things, and really kind of apply it. I mean, I have to admit that in some ways, this sort of snuck up on us, this particular conversation in terms of equitable enterprise, because we were focused on other transformations in work. And this, in some ways, we've been talking about AI for a long time, but then like it's sort of this spurt with ChatGPT just kind of popped up. And whether it's hype or not, it's having impacts. It's having real impacts. On investments, on what people worry about, on what's out there. And so I feel like we really need to focus on that. Toshi.
Yeah, just going back to my first slide. I mean, I think we all know that we're going to be arguing over if this is a trunk or a tail. Some people even believe this is Mr. Snuffleupagus, and it's really just some tech bros' imaginary friends. And I think really it's going to take these kinds of conversations to help us synthesize a broader view on this. I think the thing in terms of equity, I really hope that one of the kind of inevitable forecasts that is challenged is around whether or not this will be taken forth just by these large private organizations. I mean, I love David's analogy of the invasive species. Another, going through lots of analogies right now, I really like the analogy of the public library. There's another time where some big tech bros at that time, but they gave it to society. They didn't own it. They just did it for their legacy. And, you think even just look at OpenAI, Microsoft's investment was $11 billion. Sounds like a lot. That's nothing for a public infrastructure investment. So I really would love to see a more conversation exploring that option, which I don't think a lot of people understand is a very viable option, is to produce these as public infrastructure and public good.
Mm-hmm. All right. thank you so much for participating. To be continued. We'll share the PowerPoints. If you're interested, we'll send it to everybody, Toshi's and Lynn's. We can share probably recordings with you if you're interested. And I think we all need to digest this a bit internally at IFCF. I think we'll definitely be following up and coming up with something, whether it's part of Equitable Enterprise or it's part of our technology forecasting and or just our 10-year forecast. This is something that we will be working on. And if you have ideas on what you're doing or resources to share or anything that occurs to you post this meeting in terms of, you should be doing this, or here's some suggestions or comments or things like that, would love to see that. Would love to get those from you. We have like an internal channel, which actually Toshi and Jeremy are and Dylan and all of us, but some are more active than others. That's like it's like a river or ocean of stuff around signals and materials and documents, and people are sharing things. It's both internal IFCF and external. So I'm having trouble keeping up with all of that, but some people are better at it than others. So we have lots of things that we could be sharing. And thank you so much for participating.